This is lesson 205, complex numbers. So, what exactly is a complex number? We're going to discuss a little bit later. But first, we need to introduce the concept of an imaginary number. So, remember that taking the square root of something is finding something that's multiplied by itself that would equal that number. Well, we can't. There's no way to multiply a number by itself and it get to be negative. So we technically can't take the square root of a negative number. And so what they've done is they've created I to replace that negative. Okay, I is just going to replace the negative part of the square root. So what we do to simplify is we're going to break this up into two parts. The square root of negative 25 is like saying the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25. Okay? Anytime we have the square root of negative 1, we're going to replace it with I. And now we can take the square root of 25. So what number multiplied by itself? We'd get 5 and 5, which means it would be 5. So it's 5I in simplified form. Now, I's repeat themselves in a cycle, okay? So if we had I squared, that's like taking the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, which would equal negative 1. I to the third power is like I times I squared. I squared is negative 1, so it would be like I times negative 1, which would be negative I. And then I to the fourth is like I squared times I squared, which would be negative 1 times negative 1, which would be 1. So, and then from there it would repeat itself. So I to the fifth, for example, is I to the fourth times I, which is the same thing as I. Notice that's going to repeat itself. So if we did I to the sixth, we'd have I to the fourth times I squared, which would be, okay, I to the fourth is 1. So we'd have the same thing, which would equal I squared would be negative 1. So it repeats itself. It's going to keep going in that fraction. So what we can do is we can take this power and divide it by 4 and find its remainder. And the remainder is going to tell us which one it's equivalent to. So if I divide 4 by 20, I get 5. And I have 0 left. Okay, so if I have a remainder of 0, that means my statement is equivalent to the I to the fourth. So, which is just 1. So I to the 20th is the same thing as 1. Alright, this term conjugate means opposite. And complex here is defined by A plus 2I. So when we find the conjugate, we're actually just going to change the sign of the imaginary number. So changing the sign of the imaginary number here would become 6 plus 2I. Sorry, 6 plus 3I. Again, changing the sign of the imaginary term, this would become 4 minus 2I. And for this one, if we're going to change the term of the imaginary term, it'd be negative I minus 3. This concept of the conjugate is going to be very important in our discussion in the next lesson when we talk about dividing by a complex number.